All right, we're trying again. We had a bit of a sound issue, so this is kind of take two.
Just let us know if you can hear us now. Did anyone comment again saying there's still no
Yeah,
sound?
everybody was saying no sound. Not sure what that could be, guys. I don't really have these
Did
issues.
you try to sing?
I did. Who muted me? Somebody muted me. All right. If you're watching, give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sound. Thanks. Before I'm going to continue, I'm going to wait to make sure that you've got sound over there. Back. Right.
Thanks, Shan.
Shan, please let me know if there's sound. Back, I'm not sure if you're just back. Sounds working. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Isabel. All right, so the Pharisees, Sadducees, they make a huge issue of the disciples not washing their hands. And this turns into a bit of a debate, and eventually Jesus weighs in and he basically makes the point that a lot of us, you know, we hold on to traditions and ideas. Jesus even uses the word of doctrines. He calls it the commandments of man. And we forget the things that are more important. Now, this is not the first time Jesus would address the Pharisees in this way. There were previous times or other times in the book of Matthew, I think, where he would say to them, you tithe off your cumin and your spices, but you're not merciful. So we see the tendency always of religion to kind of, or let me rather say good religion, which is pure and beautiful, tends to want to go in a direction where it honors its tradition and its ways and ideas above what's truly at stake. And what we'll see in a moment as we read the rest of chapter 7, Jesus brings this idea of, hey guys, you have to wash your hands before you eat. And he says, look, I mean, you know, he probably would have said something like, you know, it's okay to wash your hands, it's good to wash your hands, but the real problem for us is it's not in the hands. We don't really get defiled. Now, the word defiled here would have been in the context of ceremonial cleaning. So as you might or might not know, in the Old Testament there was a lot about purity, and purity wasn't always just about being a good person like we might think of it today, but it was in terms of getting ceremonially pure, so that when you come before God or go into the temple to do your sacrifices, that things would be accepted. So I think what's going on here is the custodians of the Old Covenant and the Levitical orders are still wanting people to be ceremonially clear, pure. And what Jesus is really doing here is he's transferring that. He is putting it into more effective, eternal terms. Like, it's not about washing your hands, it's about what comes out of you. And so I'm going to read, after Jesus uses one or two examples, these examples basically just, he's saying to them, guys, you manipulate the law and the rules and the doctrines and the ideas to suit you. So let me give you what's at stake, really at stake when it comes to these things. So let's go through to Mark 7 and verse 14. Verse 14 says, and he called all the people to him and he said to them, listen to me, every one of you, and understand. There's nothing that comes from the outside of a man that goes into him that can defile him. This is contrary to many of the ideas of ceremonial cleansing and the purity laws that comes from the old Levitical order. But it says nothing that can come out from the outside go into a man. And I mean, obviously this references to dirty hands eating whatever they don't know about bacteria, but dirt and filth coming into the mouth, going into the system, and now they feel like they're unclean. He says that it doesn't work like that, but the things that come out of a man, those are the things that defile a man. So number one, we're not talking about a ceremonial purity here, but we are talking about Jesus saying that, guys, if you want, the real problem is not on the outside. The real problem for humanity has always been, and it seems to like it will always be, what's going on in here. Now, Jesus uses the word heart. There's a lot to be said about this. In the Old Testament, David uses the idea of entrails, kidneys, to be searched by God. But really what is meant here is the mind. What's going on in your brain? Back then they didn't really understand brain function, so they used the word heart. But really the mind is implied here. And so Jesus is saying it's not the stuff from the outside that defiles us, but it's what's going on in here. Nobody knows, what's going on in here. But eventually it comes out. And I think that we could probably all attest to that no matter what's going on in your mind, eventually it's going to come out through your mouth in a moment of vulnerability or in a moment of ecstasy, or maybe you had too much wine or whatever the case may be, it comes out. And when it does come out, it tells you, sometimes that could be a real revelation when you realize what's actually inside of you, but also those around you, that this is what's going on in my brain. And that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to talk about what you're thinking about, because it's not worse because you talk about it.
Yeah.
It's already what it is. So talk about it, so at least people can hear it and can say, hey, Frans, you know what, maybe we shouldn't be thinking like this, or hey, I like that, thank you, that encourages me. So I don't think Jesus is saying don't let out what's in you, because that'll be a place of hypocrisy almost, to live up here in a certain world and way and never say what you really believe and what you're really convinced about. But he is saying that the trouble always starts on the inside of man's thoughts. And the writers of the New Testament here, or at least the King James translators, calls it evil. This word is, interestingly enough, it's called kakos in the Greek, which has always been fascinating to me, the kakos inside.
So you mustn't be full of kakos.
You mustn't be full of kakos, yes. But it really also is, it's not referring to some evil spirit force that takes control of you. It's the most natural thing for a human being to let out some kakos from time to time, because none of us are perfect. And that's just how we are at this point. For anybody anyway to suggest that nobody has any kakos, any evil or hurtfulness within them, would I guess be a category error anyway. But Jesus then says the following. He says it's what comes out of a man that defiles him. And then he makes the statement, if any man have ears, let him hear. And so normally with that comes some form of wisdom, some form of strong statement about anything. And so he goes on in verse 17 to say the following. And when he entered to the house from the people, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. And he said to them, are you so with understanding? Don't you guys understand? Don't you perceive that whatever thing comes from out goes into a man, and it cannot defile him, because let me give you the FJ3 translation, it goes into his stomach, in and through his digestive system, and then falls out at the bottom. Kakos. And it's really it's an amazing thing that he would use it like that, but it's really kind of true that it's not the dust on your hands when you eat that can make or defile you, but the real kakos, the real evil, the real hurt, is that which comes from the mind and eventually through the mouth and is experienced by those who are around you. He says, in the reason, he says, because the dust or the dirt, it doesn't go into the heart, right? But it goes to the belly, And then he said, and that which comes out of a man is that which defiles the man. So I would think that what is to be understood here is not that only when it comes out it defiles you. We know that would be against the way that Jesus taught, for instance, in Matthew 5, when he says, when you think it, it's already as if you've done it. So the defiling act is not letting people know what's in your mind, but there is a defilement that we become aware of many times only once it comes out through our own minds. And then he goes on to give us some pointers, and I like this because we can make this a little bit practical, and we're going to do that today. So from verse 21, and let me read verse 21 to 23, and then we'll speak about it a little bit. Verse 21, he says, then, for it is from within the heart of a man, or from the mind of a man, that come evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, and foolishness. So he mentions about 12 or 13 things, and then he says, all these hurtful, kakos, evil things come from within the man, and that's how the defilement happens. So I want to take these 13 things that Jesus mentions here today, and we want to spend a little bit of time on them. And I want to turn them on their head. In other words, I want to project their positive sides. In other words, and not the positive sides of the evil things, but the antitypes. So in other words, theft, or no theft. And we want to apply them to relationships today. So this will be any form of relationship really, but especially in marriages or in friendships, close friendships. But also it extends to general relationships. And also I would like to just say that some of these things are not absolute. There are times when they have to be adapted to the situation, so don't feel condemned in that way. But we want to spend a bit of time on them. We want to put them into some normal terms, and then we want to reduce them down to, basically we're going to end with tonight is a small toolkit of how to build your relationships and how not to sabotage your relationships with other people. So that's where we're going. So, you know, to have a relationship with people is always complicated, because you yourself are a complicated creature and so are they. And we often can find ourselves in relationships in neutral spaces, and then we can often find ourselves in places where there's acts of sabotage, maybe not deliberately always, but the actions do sabotage the relationship. And then you find yourself in relationships where there's acts of mercy and acts of gratefulness, which actually builds up the relationship. And so many of these fall in some of these categories, and we'll have a look at them right now. So okay, let's start with number one. Number one is evil thoughts that come from a person. So I spent a bit of time just thinking about this. What would this be? What would an evil thought look like? And if we look at the direct idea of evil, meaning hurtful, it would simply mean having hurtful thoughts towards other people actually ends up sabotaging our relationships with them. And so the positive, or the antitype here, or the advice I think that Jesus implies here is, don't talk harmfully about other people. So obviously, you know, this needs to be applied in a wise way, Tori. Sometimes you have to say some harmful things, like if someone does something horrible to your child, you have to talk about it. It has to be outed. When someone, you know, that has to be spoken about. But I think what is referred to here is, don't unnecessarily spend your time saying harmful things about people that you're not willing to say it to their face, and you're saying it to people that it's irrelevant, it's none of their business, it's not going to save them, it's not going to help them. So often you find yourself in relationships, but also in conversations where people talk about people. Like, we have to be careful, because that almost never ends in a good place. So there's the saying, rather sit with people who talk about ideas and passion and vision than to sit with people who constantly sit and talk about other people. So you might find yourself in circles like that. I don't feel I have many circles like that. I don't like that. Personally, these are something I'm probably quite strong in. Some of these I'm really weak in, but I think it's one of the things I might be a little bit stronger in, is I don't like it. I don't participate. I don't put fuel on the fire. I rather keep quiet when people start doing this. But one of the things that Jesus, one of the kakos, the evil that is within us, is when we start giving thought, giving time in our minds to the things people do, and we start creating scenarios, Tori.
Yeah, we start talking about what someone's done most of the time, or what they're busy doing, and then we come up, because they're not there to defend themselves, of our own reasons why they're doing the wrong reasons and the wrong motives that they have. And that can, with a conversation with 2 or 3 people in a comfortable environment, that can get out of hand.
It can be a real poison, because you fabricate what makes sense to you without really giving the other person a fair chance to state their case. And, you know, that can be very, very dangerous. So the first one is avoid harmful discussions about other people. So the second one was adulteries and fornications, and we know how these apply in a very practical sense. Maybe if you're married, what adultery would look like. Of course, adultery in a marriage is not just the sexual act, it's also the idea of separating yourself from your spouse and becoming involved with somebody else. That act of cutting off and cleaving to something else would be an act of adultery. But how would we convey this in terms of a relationship, Tori? Like, how would we apply this? What would adultery look like in its reduced form, like in a relationship with a friend, or just
I think staying faithful to that friend in your availability towards them and in your loyalty to them, especially when things get tough, not to try and then, okay, this friendship is getting a bit
Bumpy.
high maintenance, so
Yeah.
let me go somewhere where it's easier,
Yeah.
to really stick it out with,
Yeah.
with friends when it gets difficult.
And also maybe defending people when they're not present. If you find yourself where harmful discussions taking place about your friend, to defend people to some
Yeah.
way. I'm not saying start a fight, but just to say at least, hey, look, that's my friend and I don't see it like that. I don't know them in the way that you're discussing them right now. To be faithful to them, be a sense of loyalty, I guess,
Loyal, yeah.
in the way that we keep those relationships up. Number 3 is murders, and of course murdering is not a good thing unless we put it into national terms, and then sometimes we are willing to accept war. I'm not so much inclined to do that anymore. But what would murder in a relationship be? Like, what would it kind of like relate to? Maybe impulsive acts. We get into places where those we're in relationship with, they offend us. They make us angry from time to time. If you've been married, now and again your husband will make you angry. Your wife will make you angry. And what you do with that anger can either kill or it can bring life. And many times it's just so easy to choose the kill route when anger is there and to make things worse. But maybe controlling our emotions a bit, and rather let the anger subside, and then use that motivation to actually do something good.
Yeah.
I heard something very interesting the other day. Someone said that, I can't remember who, but that anger is really in reaction to fear. Anger is really a reaction to fear. And I'm not sure how they expect people to do this, but they say that when you're angry, sit down and think about what you're afraid about, what you're afraid of. What is making you angry is most probably a reaction to the fear of something. Sometimes, for instance, you can get angry when people do stuff to your property because you have a fear that you won't have enough money to rebuild it or replace or maintain it. But yeah, so in terms of murder, the kakos, the evil that comes out of us is many times the willingness to cut something off or to kill it in anger quickly without sitting back and just giving it a little bit of time.
Yeah, and I mean,
before
if
we
you
take
think
action.
that the Bible also talks about life and death in the power of
In the tongue,
So I think
absolutely,
a lot
yeah.
of murdering is done
Yes.
in relationships and marriages by
With the tongue.
by speaking before you think,
Yeah.
speaking out of anger,
Yeah.
saying wrong things. It's almost like cursing someone.
Yes. Yeah. I think cursing in that sense is not using the F-bomb or the
Yeah.
the kakos or whatever. It's not really what it means.
No,
but cursing someone is really
killing someone
speaking, killing
with
their
words,
reputation,
yeah.
killing their heart, killing their motivation or their vision with what we say, not only towards them but also towards people around them sometimes. All right, number 4 is theft, and obviously stealing things is not a good idea. But if we think about how that would relate, or how that would translate into a relationship, I thought of the idea that no matter how close we get to people, to continue to respect what is theirs as theirs, not to take advantage of people. And this could be human resource, this could be financial, this could just be a drill or a screwdriver or whatever it might be. But one of the ways to really poison a relationship is to assume that because you're in a relationship, what is that person's is also yours, and you can take and move and break and assume their things. And I think, to me, this is quite an important one. I know I might be a little bit more pedantic about this than other people, but I think respecting other people's property, especially the people, well, everybody, but especially those you're in a relationship with, even with your wife and your husband, to realize there's some things that aren't common, that toothbrush is their toothbrush, and that one over there, that's your toothbrush, and respect that toothbrush, That's a really silly example, but I think that those things are important, that, even in a marriage, we assume everything's in common, but the reality is we're still individuals, and we still need to respect each other's things and each other's ways in that sense.
You can also be a thief of someone's time.
Yeah, that's a good one.
You can take someone's time because you're not considering that they actually don't have time for you to stand and talk nonsense for half an hour. They're trying to leave or
I think people do that all the time.
Yeah.
But some people don't mind their time being stolen so much.
Those are the people that like to steal time.
Yeah, so just to be considerate of people's things, their time, their property,
Their energy.
Yeah, and I think that you when you do that, you put things in place that can make the relationship flourish as well. Right, number 5 is covetousness, and the easiest way that I can speak about covetousness is just in the idea of jealousy. That's what I understand from covetousness is you have someone, whatever it might be, and you're not just saying, oh, you got a nice car. You start becoming jealous about the fact that they have that car and you don't have it, and that brings up all sorts of. If you just tuned in a little bit late, kakos is the Greek word for evil. It brings up all the kakos from the inside, and it works very well with some other South African words. But I think there for me, one of the things that I think is important, Tori, is to work against covetousness is to celebrate with people in their successes. Because one of the ways that you will know that people harbor jealousy or covetousness is that they are unable to be happy for you when something great happens to you, or when you achieve something nice, or you reach a goal in your life. They can't be happy for you. And to me, that's a warning sign that when people can't be happy for you, there's a sense of covetousness that's busy rearing its head there, a sense of jealousy, and you just got to be aware of that. True friends, I think, or good relationships are relationships in which people don't feel threatened by each other, and they can actually celebrate with the other people. They can recognize the difference. You might never achieve that because that's not your lane, you're in another lane, but to when that person does achieve, to celebrate that person. And I think that's a very positive way of going about a relationship. And I just personally feel like if someone can't celebrate with you in the good that's happening to you or the good that you've achieved, you have to be careful. Because in those relationships, there's an underlying something going on there that you need to just be aware of. Number 6 is wickedness or malicious behavior. And I mean, few of us would consciously want to engage in malicious behavior against people we're in a relationship with, but it does actually happen. And many times it happens because of our own insecurities, maybe because of jealousy. We could end up.
These are all quite connected.
Many of them overlap, many of them are connected, but they all come from one little pocket of humanness that sits inside all of us, that we got to pull these things into check. And especially in your close relationships, these things, you can't sabotage your relationship with your spouse and your family and your friends and your acquaintances. So not to do harm with words, with actions, to be graceful, to be sensitive to, I guess, in some degree, to what other people are going through, possibly. Number 7 is deceit. Deceit is an option, is quite an obvious idea. The Greek word means not to trick or to bait someone, but I think it sounds very intentional. It sounds very intentional, but I think deceit can also just be not to be truthful. With your relationships, not to tell people how you really feel, and sometimes some of us can hold back the truth because we're too scared of how people will react when they really know how we feel. We feel like some people do that out of a place of rejection, like they don't want to be rejected by telling people how they truly feel. But for any relationship really to move forward, there has to be truthfulness. And obvious deceit, like lying to someone, is going to end up in an absolute car crash. But we also deceive one another when we don't tell people how we really feel. And I think maybe that's one of the places I feel like I have a lot of weakness there, is that I hold back quite a bit because I don't want to upset people, so I think that's an area that it can be seen as deceit, but it's actually not. You're afraid to tell people exactly how you feel about things because of how they would react. But if we're going to be building a strong relationship with kids, with our wife, and with our friends, we have to overcome that.
We have to, and it takes a lot of trust in a space within a relationship also, not to be dishonest about how you're feeling, but to be honest about what you see in the other person.
Yeah, but that's tricky.
That's hard, but that takes, I think, if you can get it right, if you're in a space with a lot of trust and safety,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah. Number 8 is the King James, lasciviousness, which means kind of like
Lasciviousness. Lasciviousness. I don't know.
Okay, I might be pronouncing it incorrectly, but it's a lack of self-control, unbridled lust. In other words, it's not necessarily only sexual, but it's just without the ability to control yourself. You arrive at a party and you eat all the chips. You don't leave it for anybody else. You just can't control yourself. And that's a simple example of how we might act in many other ways towards the people in our relationships. We grab what we can because we have fear of lack or whatever it might be. We're unable to control ourselves and distribute. You have to be able to control your desires.
And that also
your
comes
wants,
with
your needs.
prioritizing the person in your relationship. Put them above the things that you want.
Yeah.
They must come first.
Yeah.
Nice.
So then number 9 is an evil eye. This doesn't translate so well, even if you look at what the word eye and evil means in the Greek. But evil eye, the idea in the Bible is the idea of greediness. And so that's one thing or stinginess is maybe something we could also put in there. If you want to be in a successful relationship, there has to be contribution, to your level. If your friend is a multi-millionaire and you're just an average Joe Soap, there's to your level that you can contribute. But there's nothing worse than a friend that never contributes, that always looking for a handout, that a friend that always grabs the bull last. That you all have that person that has the means but just feels okay with not contributing towards whatever the common event is. So that's important, I think. And Jesus actually, when he mentions the evil eye here, he's obviously pointing at it as a problem that comes from humanness, the unwillingness to share and distribute. But at the end of the day, we have to admit that life is about distributing. It's about giving. Not just of substance, but of yourself. If you're in a relationship with someone where that person emotionally gives and gives and gives, and you don't, it's heading for the rocks.
Yeah.
There has to be a willingness to contribute. And okay, for some people it's easier than for others, fine. But contribute to the place where it makes you uneasy, So push the boundaries of contributing in the conversation, in emotional contribution, or whatever else it might be. You might go eat out with someone and pay your half, or sometimes pay a little bit more, and just be willing to give a little bit. So the term used here is an evil eye, which is quite interesting. We see it in the book of Proverbs, and we also see it in Matthew 5 and 6. And it's all got to do really with giving, with finance. It's got to do with or substance. And so an evil eye or a wicked eye would be an eye that is unwilling to be generous. And I'm not sure what the opposite of an evil eye would be. An eye that's full of light would be one that's willing to contribute into the situation.
Also, to be a generous person is also to be like to be open in a relationship. If you're generous, people are confident to approach you. If the opposite of that is if you're stingy, it's like you're closed and people don't. They feel like there's no openness there to start a conversation, to be honest, to be vulnerable.
And that's not easy for everyone, right?
You are is not just only giving of stuff, but it's also giving of yourself and of your time. It's like a position within a relationship. You either feel that your partner or your friend is a generous person or they're not.
And the point is that to build the relationship, there has to be that generosity to move forward. The number 10 is blasphemy, and there's a lot of ideas around this, but blasphemy is in a relationship sense is not me using the word Tory every time I hit my toe, but the idea of blasphemy is to use someone's name idly. In other words, to use it without permission or to apply it to the wrong thing, especially in new relationships, but sometimes even in old ones. You've got to be careful when you use someone's name to justify your argument or to open up a door for your business. Because remember, that person's name is who they are. It's their character, it's their livelihood, it's their reputation. So I think to be sensitive with one another's names and reputations, I think is important. Consider who your friend is, what they do for a living, their status in society, and just be sensitive to how you use their name. And of course, the obvious one is not to vilify someone's name. And I mean, if you're doing that to your friends, I mean, I don't know. But the point is also that we shouldn't be doing this to anybody, really. We are applying it to friendship or to close relationships today. But the reality here is that this, at least in Jesus's view, which is the one we need to look to, this should not be done to our enemies.
Yeah.
So we need to stretch it that far as well.
Yeah.
Not this morning, but
Yeah.
another morning, right? Then number 11 is a simple one. It's just pride. Putting yourself and your needs first is going to end up in a mess. At some point, you have to leave your ego at home when you're engaging relationships, when you're engaging life. You have to learn how to put that ego somewhere else.
Something as simple as
Yeah.
apologizing or admitting
Yeah.
you made a mistake, admitting you're wrong.
Sometimes in certain psychological ideas, they put the ego as a separate entity to what our true self really is. Like an alter ego, you know, some of the singers and pop stars, they have an alter ego and they come on stage and it becomes something else. Many of us put on an alter ego the moment we're in a threatening situation, the moment you walk into a situation where someone is intimidating you by whatever means, by their financial status, by their political status, or by just their physical stature. If you feel intimidated, sometimes something comes out. It's an ego. It's not. It's kakos. You know, it's a hurtful thing that comes out. It comes out in defense and because of fear, and it does the stuff. When you sit back, you realize, oh, I should never have done that.
Like a mechanism.
Should never have. It is a safety mechanism. It's like a wall that goes up. If we learn anything from Jesus, is that unless we're willing to put that ego down, unless we're willing to drag that ego to the cross, there's no resurrection. There's no real life that can come unless we are willing to pin that sucker down at some point in our life, or you know, at least progressively, slowly recognize him for who he is in us, that ego, recognize him and slowly start to put him on the cross, I guess, is a way of saying it. The last one here, number 12, is just foolishness, senseless behavior, but really the anti-type of that is wisdom. Wisdom is not just having knowledge, but knowing how to apply knowledge in the right time. Wisdom is to be prudent, to be patient,
I was
to be
going to say patient.
calculating.
I think wisdom is very much connected with stepping back and thinking. You know what I mean? It's wise before you make a decision or before you react in a conversation or in a fight. I think wisdom takes its time.
Yeah.
And foolishness jumps without thinking.
And so wisdom is
Easier said than done.
it's very hard to, I think, the way you've described it, it's really a hard thing to learn. I think it takes a lifetime to get to any form of real substantial wisdom, to be able to apply it in a good way. But it's absolutely critical for relationships. For me, a big part of wisdom is to be able to be introspective and just look at your own situation and evaluate yourself to some degree, and from there to bring forth some form of change. All right, so we want to end today by combining the 12 into 6 that overlap a little bit less, and I just want to mention them to you before we finish off today. We're talking about relationships. We've come from a place where Jesus said, look, it's not that important whether you wash your hands or not, or whether you do this or that. What really is important is that you check what comes out of your heart or what's going on in your mind. So easily, especially as people who've been in church for a very long time. I know the church place where I came from as a young boy, like, for instance, that you're smoking. Like, if someone smoked, I mean, it was just the end of the world. Like, this is no bigger sin than smoking. But the Christians would spit poison at each other in the boardroom, in the church meetings, but whoever smoked was condemned to hell forever. You know, this is the type of ridiculousness that we got to get away from as people who follow Jesus. And I think the dust on people's hands is not that important. What is important is what's going on inside of us. So lastly, to finish off, 6 things to build relationships, to make them flourish. Don't talk harmfully about others, number 1. Number 2, be truthful in your word and in your action. If you say something, you do it. Don't say things you didn't do, and don't say things you're not willing to do. Number 3, respect other people's boundaries, respect their property, respect what is theirs, their time, and so on. Number 4, be happy for others when they succeed. Don't be silent when people around you are successful. Don't be silent about it. Express your elation, express your happiness for them. Number 5, contribute to your relationships within your ability. Always put something on the table, even though you might not be able to put as much as other people put because they're more able. Put something on that table that shows the willingness to be in communion or to be in fellowship with those around us.
Yeah.
And then lastly, don't use someone else's name or their reputation for your own gain. Have wisdom in the way that you project your relationships to other people. We end with that. So don't major on the minors. Major on the majors, what comes out of you.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think if we can fix our eyes on what Jesus placed importance on, you know, that's really what it is
That's
to be
where
a
we need to be
Christian.
moving,
Is
yeah.
really just make his priorities and the things that matter to him need to matter to us.
Yeah. And I think this is a really good example of exactly that. Right, a lot to think about, a lot to just apply in everyday life. Guys, have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you for being with us this morning.
We are over and out here from a beautiful, sunny Durban morning.
We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Cheers.